Welcome back to the Cyber Executive, where we mix risk, tech, and leadership like a triple shot espresso for your brain. I am your host, Marc Ashworth, and today I've got a real treat for you. Joining me is none other than Nathan Reller, with the founder of Ginger Cybersecurity, a cybersecurity powerhouse and all-around tech wizard. Nathan, thanks for hopping on the mic with me today.
Hey, no problem. Glad to be here.
Before we dive in, just a quick reminder, if you enjoying this show, hit the follow button on your favorite podcasting app, and don't forget to share the Cyber Executive with your friends, coworkers, or anyone else who's ever Googled how to stop getting hacked. Let's spread the cyber love. All right, Nathan. So you've done a lot of research lately and has been focused on the unnecessary complexity found in IT systems. What do you mean by unnecessary complexity? These things are not complex. They're simple, right?
Yeah, I wish they were simple. Yeah, so when I talk about unnecessary complexity, I'm referring to the layers of technology, features, and options in IT systems that don't meaningfully serve the majority of use cases, but still add significant operational overhead and risk. And I've seen this in a few different roles that I've had. As software engineer, you see things like feature creep or adding features no one requested. I saw this as a cloud operator where you'll see services that look like they do the same thing with just tons of configuration options and dials and things to tune. And then more recently, I was a SOC analyst for a little bit, and I'll dive into that example a little bit more. Where there I was trying to answer probably the most important question we have in cybersecurity, which is, have I been hacked? And to answer that question, it seems like it should be a relatively simple thing to do. You just extract all the bytes on the target system you think was hacked. You compare those to what you expect, and if they match, then you would have very high confidence that everything is fine and your system is good to go. But unfortunately, when we look at the scale of the problem, we can see that this is a really difficult problem to answer. So to kind of put some metrics on this, if we look at just comparing the files themselves, an AWS Linux instance will have 45,000 files. Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7, I believe that one had around 70,000 files, and that was for a min install. And so when you're looking at a system that has the full GUI, full operating system installed, you're looking at well over 100,000 files. And so for your guys who are working on the watch floor trying to answer that question, has this been hacked? That's a lot of data, a lot of files to go through to parse and answer that question.
Yeah, so there's definitely complexity there on that detection phase off of it. But what about prevention? What could we do there to be to handle that complexity whenever there is such complexity of the number of files and just the enterprise in general?
Yeah, so the complexity, yeah, we talked about the number of files. So on the prevention side, I'm really focused on applying that principle of least privilege. So we want to run our processes and our systems with the least resources required. So that way, if they are hacked, we can limit the impact of that hack. And when you're looking at a system with tens of thousands of files, I know for myself, part of my career was deploying services and managing them. I felt overwhelmed just by the number of files on there. And so for me, one of the ways I like to talk about this is that in security, we need to know what to expect. I'll probably say that 3 or 4 times in this podcast here. So when we have these files and these programs that are going to run, we need to know what those programs are going to do and what files they need access to, right? So if I'm a web server, I need access to my HTML files that are going to be displayed for the users. And so when you're looking at a system with 40, 50, 60,000 files, I like to tell people that's kind of like asking me to go into an NFL stadium and say, I want you to name and identify all the people here and create a graph of people that they're connected to. That's kind of the scope that we're at, right? We have to understand all these relationships. And what makes it even more complex is that not only do we have the scale, but then we have these systems that are non-deterministic. We don't really know what they're going to do.
Yeah, and so with that, you utilized, part of the zero trust principles, the least privileged access and everything, which not only, should you handle on the system side, but also in the application side, your permissions, your entitlements, all those sort of things should be part of that least privilege, component of that. Now with, you mentioned non-deterministic. So, what is that? And then what happens when a system doesn't always behave the same way? And why does that matter for cybersecurity?
Yeah, so a non-deterministic system is one that boots up and to put it bluntly, we don't really know what's going to happen on that system, and it's not because it's the system is doing random things. It is, hey, when we hit that power on button, like we know what's going to happen at the very beginning. But once the system kind of initializes itself, then we're at this unknown state where we're going to have users logging into the system and doing who knows what, right? So we have security personnel could be logging into it. Maybe have like a threat hunt team that's in there looking for signs of hackers or an attack. So maybe they're parsing files and scanning files, or maybe they're doing a port scan from the outside. You can also have like server admins going in, and maybe there's a performance issue. They're logging in and they're doing pings to see what the latency is. They're using TCP dump to see if there's anything wrong with the network and the packets they're receiving. And so the reason this is non-deterministic is because the way you do things as your team does these operations and the way I do it and the way everyone else is a little bit different. And so in cybersecurity, what we're doing is our best to try to model common characteristics of this. And then we'll say, okay, yeah, when a server admin is logging into the system, they're probably going to do the same set of things, maybe slightly different, but it's pretty common. And so we're trying to guess what good looks like on this. And for me, it's the best approach that we have right now. But the problem is bad guys can blend in, because when you have your admin going in and scanning for ports or scanning files looking for signs of attackers, well, that's kind of the same thing the bad guys are doing, the hackers are doing. And what makes it even more challenging is that guy, I always go back to the SOC analyst, he's going to get an alert saying, hey, we found some behavior. It looks malicious. Go figure out if this is actually bad or not. And that SOC analyst, I can tell you is it's difficult, because you get an alert and you're like, well, do I even know what this process is to begin with? I used to get alerts about LSAT's process, and I was like, I don't even know what that is to begin with. And then how do I find out? How do I know if it's my threat team or not? With them, you probably get a heads up. But if it's just a normal user machine, you're kind of scratching your head. You can ask them if you want, but a lot of times they don't know what you're talking about. So it's very difficult, that non-deterministic system, because you're just trying to guess at that point.
Yeah, and really after the initial boot and the first person logs in, that behavior of that PC will never be the same anyway when it really comes down to it, right? Because
Yep.
with the exception of maybe a virtual desktop solution where it's always getting that same image, it's getting the same software each time, and every time that you log back in, it gets a refresh of that. PCs and servers don't behave that way because they're kind of their own little being, right?
Yep.
So when you're looking at this from a SOC analyst standpoint, because as you mentioned, you used to be one. What other complexities are there from a SOC analyst? And I'm glad that you brought SOC analysts up for starters. If I'll digress a little bit, because in the previous episodes we haven't really talked about the life of a SOC analyst and what they're going through. So if you can kind of talk about those complexities and kind of a little bit of a day in a life as a SOC analyst.
Yeah. So a SOC analyst is he's the guy that sits on what's typically called the watch floor. So there's a room that's set aside for the security team, and they're in there and they got screens up all over the place so they can monitor charts for like network throughput and any other data that they're collecting. But the real screen that happens is when you get an alert, and that's going to pop up an email or some sort of red flashing light to get your attention and say, hey, we've got something here. You need to look at it and you need to tell me whether or not this is malicious. And if it's malicious, you got to tell me how this thing got in here so we can start to remediate the situation. Now, one of the common scenarios that you'll find as a SOC analyst, to give you a better picture of what they're doing. So a common scenario is finding an unknown binary on the system. So typically what I've seen in the past with this is they'll take that binary and they'll feed it to VirusTotal. So VirusTotal is it's a service provided by Google, I think, where you can feed a binary to it. And it's going to run all these antivirus tools against it. So they're gonna poke and prod at it, put it in the sandbox, see what this thing does. And they're going to have like 70 to 90 of these antivirus tools doing this. And at the end, when they're done, after a few minutes, they're each going to give you a thumbs up that, hey, we think this thing is good and it's not malicious, or thumbs down, like, hey, this thing is bad. You should really investigate it more. Now, this sounds like a great tool. And the best case scenario, which is somewhat ironic, is when they all tell you it's bad. Because if they all tell you it's bad, you know exactly what to do. Like, take care of the situation. Let's isolate the system and begin a remediation process there. The other situation that's not so bad is if they tell you, if everyone says it's all good, like if they tell you it's all good, you think, yeah, that'd be great. You know, that's probably better. But still in the back of your mind, you're like, maybe they're just not detecting some sort of new behavior or new tactic that the attacker is doing. So the third option then is the worst case scenario, when you get 20 to 80% of these things telling you it's bad. And then again, you have this complexity. You have these redundant tools giving you mixed signals. You know, maybe 30% of them are saying it's bad. The other 70% say, well, we don't know. We think it's okay. And at that point, you're in this gray zone where you live most of your life, where you're like, what should we do? You know, is 25%? Should we take action? And then you start to look at the asset and try to make a decision whether or not you want to take it down or not. So that was the biggest surprise for me when I worked on the watch floor. I was just like, okay, you know, we're just going to find viruses, take care of them, but there's a lot of gray area there where you have to make these decisions without all the data that you want.
Yeah, and when you're in a smaller shop, you're doing even more than just that. You know, if you're in a larger, you might be more isolated on what you're doing, but when you're in a smaller security team, you might be handling a investigation up to a certain point before it gets handled off to, you know, a more senior person, versus some might just, you know, submit a ticket and, you know, it gets sent right over, you know, earlier on and everything. So it all kind of changes depending on the size of the organization that you're with and the complexities. And one thing we have talked about in the past is around burnout, and you hear a lot around the analyst burnout because of just the constant barrage of alerts that's coming out throughout the day. And the bigger the organization, the more alerts there are. Don't you agree?
I agree. Yeah. And for me, it's not just the number of alerts, it's the times that you're just like, man, I really don't know how to find the answers sometimes. There's just too much data to try to parse.
Yeah. Yeah. So what other complexity factors are really interesting you right now?
Yeah. So one other perspective that I look at in terms of complexity is mutability of the system. So for those of you who aren't familiar with immutable infrastructure, or I should say mutable, let's start there. So mutable infrastructure is infrastructure that can change over time. Mm-hmm. So this is the way things have typically been in the past, where you would deploy a system. So we'll just say we have a web server we want to deploy. We'll create the system, we'll put all the software on there, update the config files, and then we let it run. And from there, we'll go back in periodically to update the system, to take care of it, to feed and care for it, if we go to the cattle versus pets analogy there. So we will do things like update the packages on the system, so we're running the latest software. You may have the server admin go in and change a config file. Perhaps there's a new setting that we want to change to try to optimize performance. So the big thing is the system is changing. And the longer amount of time between the initial deployment and the current time is the more likely there are things to change on that system. And as I said before, security requires knowing what to expect. So we kind of get further and further away down the timeline. We don't know exactly what's going to be on there. And sometimes that can catch you off guard when you're trying to defend your systems.
Mm-hmm.
Now, immutable systems are different. So in these types of systems, when you do a deployment, you don't allow administrators to log into the system and make these changes. So Google was a big proponent of this. At least that's where I heard it first. So what they would do from a technological point of view to enforce this is they would create a virtual machine, they would deploy it, and they would use their provisioning system to install the software they wanted and the config files from the repositories that they had. And what they would do is they would change the password to a random 32-character password as an example, and then they would log out of the system and delete any trace of that password. So no one could log into that system. It's a great way to force that. So they couldn't get in, hackers couldn't get in, and it kept those files consistent. So from the operator's point of view, they were like, hey, this is pretty great for us because now we have a really good idea of what files are going to be on there. And it's a great forcing function for configuration changes. So we could check those in and do something like infrastructure as code, check it in. And then anytime you want to update the system, you do a complete rebuild with the new config file.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we used to do that went back when I was in healthcare. We in the early days of virtual desktops, and we would have that golden image, and we would push virtual applications out on top of the fact, not even have anything installed there. Whenever they logged off, they would get a full clean version of that each time, and then we would, if we need to make an update to the OS or something along that line, then we would, create a whole new image associated with that and then push that out and provision it to the users and stuff. And it works really good when it works. And when it doesn't, then there's a lot of problems. And then, the doctors are knocking on your door and saying, hey, why is the systems down? So yeah, that happens. Yeah. One thing from an immutable type of system that's important is around your backups and making sure that your backups themselves cannot be changed. And that's something that, organizations need to make sure that that's the case. That way, ransomware or, a hacker, they're going to go far those backup systems right away to make sure you can't recover. And so that's something that you want to make sure that your environment is set up for when it comes to immutability and stuff. So if you're if a system's locked down and you can't change it, how does that make it safer, or is it just harder to manage? You kind of hit on it a little bit, but if you can kind of talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, so the biggest aspect of immutable infrastructure is it gives us this property where we know what to expect. So one of the consequences of doing your infrastructure this way is now your system is deterministic. So we've taken away the user from the system. So when that system boots up, it's going to boot up and it's going to run whatever application you've configured it to run, like your web server or your email server, whatever it might be. And on top of that, we know what the files should be. Those config files that are highly sensitive and important that they're correct, we know what those are going to be as well. And so what this does is we have a system that's not changing, it is deterministic, and now we can start to enable certain technologies that are ineffective with mutable systems at the enterprise, but highly effective in constrained environments like this. So one of those would be application allow listing. So this is where before any binary is allowed to run, what you do is you take a hash of it, it's like cryptographic fingerprint, and you say, hey, is this on the list? And if it's not on the list, it's not allowed to run. And this is great for cybersecurity because instead of trying to play whack-a-mole, like, does this look bad or not? We're saying, this is the approved list. This is everything we want. It's not on the list. It's not going to run. So any new malware that you're going to see isn't going to be allowed to execute. Mm-hmm. And so what's great is now we can start to automate some of this and really see the impact of things that were a little bit impractical in the past with application allow listing. We can now do that at a system level.
Yeah, and I think out of any tool in the tool set next to the firewall, I think an application allow listing tool is probably the next best thing there. I've been in organizations where we were constantly rebuilding malware or boxes because it had malware on it. We couldn't fully clean it off, or adware and all that sort of thing. And once we rolled that out, we had none of that. And so any place that have that in there is just, have it on your servers, have it on your workstations, all that is definitely highly advised. And again, that's part of the zero trust infrastructure or framework too, is another component of that. So, you mentioned some of the interesting properties with the number of files, deterministic systems, immutable systems. How do all of these things work together whenever you're looking at an organization?
Yeah, so the properties kind of work hand in hand. So the small number of files gives us something manageable, something we can, the typical person can wrap their head around. And then the predictability that we get from immutable systems is really what helps take it to the next level. So when we look at prevention, right, we can easily create and review an application allow list. So for a system like ours, which has less than 20 files, like we can easily review that allow list because it's manageable. And then we can take it a step further and we say, okay, we have a small number of files. We know what those binaries or executables or programs are going to do. Now we can start to actually apply that principle of least privilege, which is very difficult to do in today's environment. Most people claim that they have it, but most processes are allowed to execute Bash or PowerShell. So now over a lunchtime, we can review each file, make sure that it has the correct permissions that it should, and prevent the spillage, or really we're focused on that containment at that point. And on detection side, they also work hand in hand together. So, we talked about that SOC analyst. So imagine getting a system and, you were used to investigating a system with tens of thousands of files, and now you got, less than 20. That's significantly going to improve your performance, your accuracy, and as well as having that property of immutability. So now we can say, not only do we have a small number of files, but we can ask the developer, like, what should these files be? And we can quickly remediate that situation. And one other aspect that I think is the most exciting for me is, now that we have deterministic systems, we can even take it a step further by not only examining the files, but for the data at rest, but we can begin to examine the data in use and start to scan all the executable code that's running on that system to detect any type of attack, right? We can verify that those programs haven't been modified, or new executable code hasn't been added to the system while in use as well.
Great. So we talked a lot about operating system complexity, but what about the complexity at the enterprise level? When you're talking, 500, 2,000, 50,000 systems, that all, gets exponentially greater. So what about that enterprise level?
Yeah, so at the enterprise level, we talked a little bit virus total, application allow listing. But I'm always, one of the things I'm focused on a lot is configuration options. So I look at a tool like Active Directory. Like, this is probably one of the most important components that's sitting on your network. It's in charge of a lot of access control and authentication. And for me, I'm a cybersecurity guy, I'm an IT guy. I think Active Directory is great, but man, when I try to configure it, I don't know about you, but like, I feel overwhelmed. Like, I'm like, dude, I want to know what all these things do and just read about them. But I was just like, I don't have time to get into it. And one of the statistics that really sticks out to me was a few years ago, Microsoft Cyber Signals released a statistic that 80% of the attacks that they were analyzing for this report could be attributed to a misconfiguration error. And you can see it with these tools like Active Directory. And on the Linux side, you can just look at OpenSSH, right? That has 80 to 90 config options. And on the Linux side, at one time I looked under my etc directory, that's the config directory. It's very important. You could see 4,000 files under there. And you're like, you can do the math on that, 4,000 files. How many of those are config file? Maybe a few thousand. how many options do they have? I don't know, maybe a couple dozen. How long does it take me to learn each one? A couple minutes each. That stuff adds up, and we really need to be better as a community of saying, hey, we got enough config options here. Let's start to dial it back a little bit. And then I'll say the other big aspect of enterprise level that I'm really interested in is container security, container architectures. Because I look at that and it's like, hey, we had Linux operating systems, which is where most containers run, and it was a highly complex environment. We weren't able to really answer the question, have I been hacked, as we discussed earlier. And now we're putting containers on top of this with C groups and namespaces and overlay networks and NAT. Like, it just seems like we're taking a situation where it was already complex and just adding even more complexity. It's something that concerns me quite a bit. And if you look at I don't know if you've read the State of Kubernetes report. Red Hat releases a report every year on it. And they talk about, that was the theme from 2024 was containers and Kubernetes environments are very complex, they're very difficult to manage, and that can lead to a lot of security incidents.
Yeah, and you hear about a lot of the leaked data out there, or these S2 buckets that are just found and they were just misconfigured. There's the human error out there for that is just so high, and you have constantly people looking for those mistakes to happen. The security teams, IT has to be perfect 100% of the time, and unfortunately that's unrealistic to think that that's going to happen, and that every checks and balance and everything else is going to detect a misconfiguration, and unfortunately it just does not, no matter how good the security team is or the monitoring that's put in place by IT and others. It just doesn't happen, unfortunately. So with this complexity and automation and everything, how do you feel like AI is going to help balance that?
Yeah, so I think AI is going to help. So I look at my approach is always to limit the complexity of the environment. But I think AI can play a role in where you're that analyst and you're saying, hey, I don't know what this is, but let me ask AI to give me some advice. Like if I'm investigating something, I talked about the LSAS process. Most people don't know what that is. So, hey, AI, what is this?
Mm-hmm.
What should it be doing? And having it examine some of those log files when you're doing that incident response, I think that's where it can really help that analyst do their job more quickly and effectively.
Great. So something that I do with every guest is ask a couple flavor or so of a few questions here. So I'm going to do the same thing for you, Nathan. What is
All right.
something the security industry could do better?
All right. That's a good question. So one of the things I think we could do better is incorporate more software engineers. Like I'm a big proponent of that. So for me, before I worked on the watch floor, I would say I'm a software engineer. Like I love writing code. And then when I got to work on the watch floor, I'm like, oh my gosh, we should be writing so much code to automate this. Like we got to bring more software engineers in here. So like I think we should bring in more software engineers. And I think we got to say, hey, if you guys are going to write this code, you guys should monitor it yourself. Let's put them on the hot seat, because I think when you do that kind of stuff, they're gonna say, hey, we can do these things to automate things. We can do these things to simplify things. So I think that would be a great thing for the community to start doing.
Yeah, those DevOps engineers can come in quite handy with the help with the automation, but then to force those app developers to understand what sort of pain they're causing everyone else, right? Because they just do it
Yep.
and go, right? I used to be an app developer years ago, so I understand that too. So that's
Yep.
so. What is something that you're tired of hearing about?
So one thing I'm tired of hearing about is, and maybe it's because I'm an optimist, but I'm tired of hearing that hackers have the advantage, right? I mean, you touched on this a little bit. The thinking is they only have to be right once, and defenders have to be right every time. And I kind of look at this from a different lens, and I'm like, well, it's kind of the same thing. I know it's a little bit of a stretch, but to compare it to Fort Knox, right? Somebody's only got to be right once, but nobody's robbed it yet, right? And so I look at it from like the physical world. The defensive side typically has the advantage because you can dig in, you can fortify your systems, and I think we can do that same thing in cyber defense. Like we know what the game plan is, right? They're gonna introduce a stimulus to the system. They are gonna use that stimulus to execute code, and then from there they'll do whatever it is they want to do, ransomware and whatnot. And I think one of the things, this is kind of related to it. I also get tired of hearing that hacking is easy. And this is what I call like the hacking paradox, because hacking is easy, right? If you're exploiting misconfiguration errors, so the S3 buckets, right? It's kind of like an opportunistic attack. But if we can start to change our environments and our processes to eliminate those easy attacks like phishing and misconfiguration errors, and force the attackers to do something really complicated like find a new zero-day vulnerability and then hack our system and then get past things like application allow listing, I think we can begin to shift that narrative from the attackers are always going to win to the defenders are going to win, and we're in the good position.
Yeah. Great. So what are the latest trends in security that you're actively monitoring?
So I'm a privacy guy, so I like to follow the legislation that happens with regards to privacy and how the governments often want to see encrypted traffic, see encrypted messages, and I follow that quite a bit. From a political point of view, it's interesting. From a technological point of view, I find it interesting, and I keep wondering if somebody's going to come up with a good answer on that. I know the technologists, we're very adamant that you can't do it. And I'm like, I don't know. Again, I'm an optimist. I'm like, maybe people were saying the same thing when there was only symmetric key encryption. How do I establish a secure tunnel if I don't have pre-shared keys? And it's like, hey, people came up with something there. So, maybe we'll come up with something good here too. I don't know.
Well, sounds good. Well, hey, Nathan, I've enjoyed the conversation. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
And for everyone else, thanks for tuning in to the Cyber Executive. If you had fun, learned something, or enjoyed the sound of our voices, go ahead and smash that follow button on your favorite podcasting app. And hey, don't keep us a secret. Share the show with your friends, coworkers, and that one cousin who still thinks cyber means AOL chat rooms. We won't judge. Thank you.